So, the topic for this evening is emptiness as a basis for liberation. And emptiness is an idea which we find in all the levels and dimensions of Buddhism, in all the different schools. It gets packaged slightly differently, but the basic principle is the same. It's essentially the fundamental basis of understanding the confusion of grasping at the world and finding things to hold on to. So two things operate: a tendency from the one side to grasp, and the fantasy on the other side that there is something that you can get hold of. And this is the basic movement of dualism or duality. What is it that's grasped at? This is empty. Who is the one who does the grasping? This also is emptiness. So I'll try to put this a little bit into context so that you can get a sense of how this can be part and parcel of everyday experience. Because it's like a screwdriver. It unscrews the hinge points which keep the edifice of samsara in place. And it's also a lubricant that allows the fricative movements of subject and object to be less conflicted, less generating of unnecessary energy, and so life moves more smoothly. From the Buddha's early teaching, we have the indication that all phenomena are impermanent. Impermanent means they're changing. And you can take that in two ways. There are things which change, or there is change within which our mind conceptualizes things. When we take the first reading, you get an increased sense of motility and possibility, but there is still the basic assumption that there are entities which exist. What are these entities? They're often described as dharmas, as things. The Buddha also said, of course, that all compounded things are impermanent. So then there's a question, are dharmas compounded, or are they singular and unitary and having a life of their own? And various schools of Buddhism have debated around this. When we see phenomena as existing as something in themselves, for example, beside me there is a table. On the table there is a cup and a watch. We look around the room, we see people. When you see somebody's face, it seems self-evident that somebody is there. That we look out on a world which is preformed. It's there before we encounter it. And so we are, as it were, running in our lives after the fact of existence. We are secondary to the world. And this leads us into the very common form of mental functioning, which is to be commentarial. We make commentaries about the world. We generate meaning in the world through the kind of narrative that we can generate about the world. And this narrative becomes a kind of thread. We take the entities of the world as if they were loose beads, and we string them onto the threading of our narrative and make the necklaces of meaning with which we adorn ourselves. For example, when you see Kali and some of the other deities, some of the Herukas, they wear a necklace of 50 skulls. These 50 skulls represent the Ali Kali, the consonants and vowels of the Sanskrit alphabet. Because when these basic building blocks are put together, then you can start to manifest your narrative. You can start to make a story. And it appears that each of these vowels and consonants is a something. And our real issue this evening is to think about what is somethingness. Because as long as the mind commences its operation on the basis of the seeming givenness of stuff, what we have is the elaboration of interpretations of stuff. And because we are very good at beguiling ourselves with our own creativity refracted through the reification, the substantialization, which gives the felt sense that something is there existing in itself, there's always more to say. Always, about everything. There's no end to it. This is why people can come to therapy for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You will never get to the bottom of yourself, because the self is an unfolding process, and it's fed by the very action of talking about it. Just as the world is fed by and elaborated through the ways in which we think and talk about it. So the addition of interpretation onto what is there elaborates our ordinary sense of how the world is. Something about which something can be said. So what is that process of the felt sense of the something? How is it that when the Buddha says everything is impermanent and everything is compounded, and we also have a sense of our own history, that we were once small children, we went to school, we've gone through lots of changes, and through these changes we've developed all sorts of personality characteristics, memories, tendencies, and so on. Although we know all of this about ourselves, there still seems to be a core sense that we exist as something. I am myself. So this is quite strong, this is quite powerful. In the face of all the evidence of change, of the fact that we have moods, we have feelings, we have hopes and fears, which arise in interaction with the world, that is to say, I move out towards the world and the world moves towards me. I breathe out, I breathe in. There is clearly no sealant around us. We may feel that we are an individual, that we are an isolated monad, that we are entire unto ourselves, and yet the very physical facticity of our being is that we look out and light comes into our eyes. We hear, we speak, we drink, we piss. Our body is in a ceaseless conversation with the world. And the feelings that we have, the interplay of our hopes and fears, arise in relationship. And yet, here I am. I'm me. You are you. Weird. Things are not what they seem, but that's a very disturbing idea. Let's just believe that they are what they seem. This is the functional presentation of ignorance in our daily life, that we become attached to particular kinds of narratives. This is what we're given in our childhood through our parents and going to school. We learn how to elaborate particular kinds of interpretation. We learn not only to make commentaries on direct experience, but we can make commentaries on indirect experience, and we can make commentaries on indirect experience of indirect experience of indirect experience. So at school, you might have to write an essay on King Lear. So to do that, you read some commentaries on King Lear. Then you look up some critique of the commentary on King Lear. Building castles in the air. And yet, someone reads it and they say, oh, that's good. I think you're really starting to understand what's going on here. Oh. So the more ideas I have, the more I see. Buddhism goes in the other direction. The fewer ideas you have, the more you're likely to taste directly what is going on. The function of meditation is to release our addiction to ideas as being the vehicle of truth. So, conceptual elaboration, prapancha in Sanskrit, is a very powerful force. It's the way in which one thing leads to another, that we want to say more. And the reason we do that is because of the very nature of language. Each word has no meaning in itself. Meanings move within the semiotic web of interaction and linking. And so it would be impossible to find one word that would simply define it, and there you would be. So in our yearning for simplicity, we say that the signifier and the signified exist in a very simple correlation. So if there is a cup, the cup is something which is signified through the use of the idea of cup. I say it's a cup, and when you look at it, you say, yeah, James knows what a cup is. He is able to accurately identify what he's holding in his hand. This is not a frog or a dog, it's a cup. That makes sense. That's how we tend to proceed. But of course, someone else might say, well, it's not really a cup, it's a mug. So now we get into some finer distinctions. And it's a particular kind of mug. And it's also, should you so wish, quite a dangerous weapon. You could hit someone very hard on the head with it. You could break the edge of it and gouge out their eyes. You could use it to bail out a boat. You could use it as a listening trumpet to help your fading hearing. There are many, many functions which are embedded in the object, but which are hidden from us by our desire to know precisely what it is. So, in order to give myself the sense that I know what is what, I have to exclude the potential of the object, because objects always slip away. We tend to believe that we know who other people are. But everybody is multiple. We are plural. We have many aspects of our personality. We have many moods. We have many potentials. And these are revealed according to the circumstances in which we meet people. So we can only know certain aspects of people. And yet we feel we want to know who they are. We want to be able to say, oh, I know what they're like. That desire to apprehend an object which seems to be something apprehendable because it exists in and of itself, as a mug, as a person, as a man, a woman, whatever. This is the basis of the ego's sense of competence and confidence. To be able to move our way through the world, applying the right identificatory categories so that we gain some purchase on what is going on. Because just as this mug has a handle, and that's the normal way in which one would be holding it, all the objects in the world have a handle, because we grasp them. We grasp them with a handle that we affix to them. So in Dzogchen texts, I talk a lot about the naked state of the mind. Naked means no clothing, no handles. The mind is compared to a round bowl. A bowl has no edges or corners. There's nothing to grasp and hold on to. And yet in our everyday existence, the ease of our being in the world with others is entirely facilitated by our capacity to find the handle and then use it correctly. This is a mental activity. But it's a mental activity which is self-deceiving, because it only really works if you imagine that the handle that you grasp belongs to the object. Which means my power as an ego requires me to live in a dead world. So that when the Buddha says all things are impermanent, he's indicating they are dynamic, they are moving, they are changing. You know, as the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus is famous for saying, you can never step in the same river twice. Very simple thing to say, but it's profound, because if you go to the River Thames and you go every day, if you're way upriver and you go for a swim, you can say, every day I swim in the Thames. But every day when you plunge into the Thames, it is different water. Different water, but the same name. That is to say, the phenomenal actuality of what you're encountering is fresh and new, but you reassure yourself about what you're doing by adhering to the name, I am swimming in the River Thames. The stability is not in the water. The stability is in your capacity to convince yourself that your concepts are giving you an accurate account of what is there. So, what is named is not the thing itself. It's not the actual phenomena. Words slip away. Identifications slip away. Identities slip away. There is an immediate actuality. But what is it? This is one flavour of the meaning of emptiness. That the reason that any object, any person, can sustain multiple usages, multiple definitions, multiple identities, is because there is a fundamental emptiness of defining substance, or what you might call essence. In having no essence, there is the space of possibility across which the creative potential of the mind moves in its usual vehicle of language. So we are ceaselessly creating many aspects of the world which we encounter, and yet it becomes easier to deny ourselves in the central role of our own existence and move ourselves off to the margin as small people who are at the mercy of many factors in the big world. There's all this stuff out there, and I don't quite know what it is. And I don't quite know who I am. But there's some big people somewhere who know what's what. But I don't. Do you? This is the fear of the ego, a fear that the ego gives to itself by frightening itself, by imagining that the world is knowledge. Knowledge produced through conceptualization. We do it through relying on consciousness. And in the Buddhist tradition, consciousness is knowing shapes. It means it is knowledge of apprehendables. So the senses, the five senses, knowledge, that which can be apprehended through the sense consciousnesses. Then mental consciousness apprehends the fruits of the sense consciousnesses by having them formulated in a way that you can get a handle on them. What you're grasping at is your own projective fantasy. There is nothing. But this nothing is very rich. It is the glimmering, shimmering radiance of the mind, which is never exhausted. It has infinite potential. But how would you live with that? You wouldn't know where you were. You get up in the morning, you have to, oh, what will I do? The space in front of me is wide open and fresh. Oh, got to go to work. Got to do this, got to do that, got to do that. So necessity becomes an organization which hides from us the mind as the movement of our creative potential. So if we think, okay, empty of what? in the earliest teachings from the Buddha, emptiness is a kind of deconstructive move. It's to say there is an absence of inherent self-nature in phenomena. First of all, he's saying there's an absence of inherent self-nature in people, in Pudgala, in essentially human beings, but all those who have the 5 skandhas. And in the Mahayana analysis or development of this, saying all dharmas have an absence of inherent self-nature. That is to say, the more you look into something, the more you try to find what is the core of it, what is the internal definition that guarantees this is what it is, we find nothing. So in that Mahayana analysis, through Nagarjuna and so on, we look at the development of the idea of dependent co-origination or interdependence, that each form comes into being in dialogue, in relationship, in interaction. Who we are, clearly, when we think about it, has been influenced by our parents, the time that we were born, that is to say, the mood of the times, the culture of the times, our gender, our state of health, and so on. And our state of health is, of course, strongly influenced by the kind of medicines that were available when we needed them, whether these were provided by a hospital system or not. So, in the movement of the trajectory of our becoming ourselves, who I am now, many, many factors have been involved. Now, we can tell about these factors as my history. And in that we somehow incorporate them as supportive actors on the stage of my divine self. I want to thank all those who have helped me be the person I am today. But they're not outside, they're inside. We are inhabited. We've got poltergeists, ghosts, we've got all kinds of stuff running through us because we don't have a clear boundary. The skin keeps some things out and some things in. It's not very nice to have a hernia. But most of the time we want air to be coming in and air to be going out. We are interactive, and all phenomena are interactive. Even the mug is interactive. It appears to be self-existing. It appears to be something which is here just by itself. Well, that's if you take my hands for granted. If I remove my hands, we have a mess on the floor. So, what will I do with the mug? I better put it somewhere. Every something is somewhere. You can't take the somewhere out of something. This is very, very simple, very direct, but it's very deep. The context and the object, or the context and the entity, are inseparable. When we start perceiving self-existing entities, the essence that we perceive in the entity is an essence projected by the mind. It is the mind which stabilizes or attempts to stabilize that which is unstable, and in fact that which can't be stable. So this is generally what is called samsara. It is the effort to freeze the world, to turn the flow of experience, which is interactive and beyond prediction, beyond appropriation, to turn it into something which can be made reliable, made predictable. Now we're going to have a decision. Should we stay in Europe or go out of Europe? If we go out of Europe, where will we go? We will go somewhere. If we stay in Europe, we will be somewhere. In neither case are we likely to like where we are, because nowhere is the right place. Dissatisfaction is part of our existence because the placing of things somewhere is very hard to do precisely. Why? Because of the commentarial movement of our mind. We enter into judgment. We have imagination. We can imagine the world to be other than it is, and therefore we condemn ourselves to endless activity trying to make this form into that form. If only I had that form, I would feel better. That form is better than this form. But when you work to get from this form to that form, you find there's something wrong with it too. And so life goes on, and then you come to your death. This is what samsara is. The endless, endless adjustments of forms. If you think of what's happened to British education in the last 30 years, or the universities, or the hospital system, is endless tinkering, endless changing, social work departments, the legal service, how funding is made for the courts, the role of the police in society. Endless change. Where is the essence of any of that? Because people bring their minds and think, we can make it better. Things have to change. Well, the river is flowing. You don't actually have to push the river. It will change anyway. The reason people want change is because they've convinced themselves that there is stability. But the stability exists only in their own mind. But instead of looking at their own mind and thinking, well, I could just change my thoughts about it, and the object's going to change anyway, I'll change the object. And then my mind will feel some relief, because I don't like how the object is at the moment. This is quite a confusion that goes on. So politicians can get a lot of media time out of flogging something which is already occurring. So when we look at our own mind in meditation, we see thoughts, feelings, sensations, experiences are ceaselessly arising. There's nothing to grasp hold of. It's there for a moment. It has an impact so that the current topology or the contouring of our experience is reshaping itself as if you had 20 people moving under a big silk sheet. It's bobbing up and down according to the movement. But there is no stasis in that. If bad thoughts come, you might get terrified and retreat from them. You might feel you need to change them and push them away. Whatever you try, they'll go. You might have good thoughts. You might want to hang on to them and build on them and develop them, but they vanish. All mental phenomena are impermanent. All outer phenomena are impermanent. The illusion of permanence is generated by the reliance on abstractions which form a second-order discourse, a kind of miasma, a fog through which it appears that when we are thinking about things, we're actually somehow getting a handle on the thing. But thoughts grasp thoughts, and thoughts are always dissolving. Thoughts are innately, intrinsically empty, but they're very good. They generate the illusion of being reliable and that there's something there. And then they're gone. So it's like going to the movies or the theatre. You're taken into a narrative that seems to be going somewhere and it endures for a short period of time and then it's gone. Then it's over. And think, what was that all about? We believed in the movie. We got taken in by the characters. Some meaning, some value seemed to be there. And then it's gone. And you might tell someone, oh, it's quite a good movie, you should go and see it. What would they get? Well, they got what you got. Sand pouring through their fingers. Now, on a nice hot day, sitting on the beach somewhere in the Mediterranean, soft sand, it's warm, picking it up and letting it dribble through your fingers could be quite pleasant. But if you realize that the whole of your life is dribbling through your fingers, that's another matter. But what's it all about? What was it for? It wasn't for anything. It's meaningless. Why on earth would I be interested in a Buddhist view that says everything's meaningless? What's the point of meaninglessness? The point is, it's because everything is meaningless that it can be meaningful. If the objects of the world were intrinsically meaningful, then the capacity of our mind to develop them would be very restricted. It's because the objects of the world exist as potential that they can be endlessly filled with meaning. Meaning comes from the mind, not from the object formation. So this is the central point. It is the empty mind moving in the empty world where the clarity of the mind, the energy of the mind, reveals the ceaseless potential of the unfolding. The unfolding of what? Whatever you want to call it. It's up to you. So in the Dzogchen tradition, they say there is one ground, basic ground of the Dharmadhatu, the open, empty nature of the space within which all possible forms arise. If you recognize the empty ground, then you see that everything which arises is like a rainbow. Now, we can say a word, rainbow, and you have some idea of what it means, because we've all seen a rainbow in the sky. Nobody has managed to catch a rainbow or touch it or put it in their pocket. We experience a rainbow. In fact, we're often touched and moved by seeing a rainbow. You're out in the country and this incredible light fills the sky, the aurora borealis. You see this incredible thing, go, wow, something is happening, but you can't catch it. And this is, in the tradition, used as a way of describing all our experience. That what we have is the fullness, the richness of the revelation of momentary experience, which never becomes an appropriatable entity. What we appropriate is the sloughed off skin of the moment. Just as a snake sloughs off its dead skin, when we grasp something, life itself has slithered away. Life is always moving. And so one good way to become bored and sad and uncertain about ourselves is to devote the years of our life to the accumulation of snakeskins. What do we then do with this wish to appropriate? No, we have to look. Who is the appropriator? I am. In order for me to be me, to continue being the one who I know I am, certain factors around me have to remain the same. Because if there's too much change, I don't like it. I become anxious. I don't know what's going to happen. This is an experience we all have. In that way, we start to see how we're actually off balance, and we're using what we take to be object formations to prop us up. So the objects that we are attached to, our possessions, music, friends, and so on, become like a series of flying buttresses that are holding up the shaky wall of our notion of who we are. We don't want to fall apart. Well, who would fall apart? When you observe yourself in the morning and you have a sense of the content of your experience, there are certain sensations in the body, certain feeling tones, certain thoughts. This is the current inventory of yourself. By the time you get to the afternoon and you take the inventory once again, the sensations are different, the feelings are different, the thoughts are different. You have vanished. Morning self has gone. Afternoon self has arrived. Effectively, you have fallen apart. And it wasn't so painful. Because it's a seamless move. It's a ceaseless unfolding in which the dissolving of one moment gives rise to the arising of the next moment. Emptiness is not a hellish void. It's not a chasm of despair and existential lostness. Emptiness is the plenum void, the full void which ceaselessly shows its rich potential. In the Buddhist tradition, in the higher tantras and in Dzogchen, this is referred to as the Dharmakaya, the aspect of the mind which is empty and full at the same time. It's empty because you will never find it as a substance or as an entity, and yet it's always full of the unfolding of experience, which is its own shining liquid surface. That liquid surface, when it's attended to, is what's called the Sambhogakaya, which means the aspect of enjoyment. Enjoyment means the richness of the world is vital. It's infinite potential. And then within that you have the Nirmanakaya. And Nirmanakaya is the aspect of momentary arising. The root of the term is nirmita, which is like a spark from the fire. It's not continuous, it is situational. And if you observe your own direct experience, when you're walking down the street, there is moment and moment and moment. Each of these moments is what it is. Of course, you can take the thread of narrative and you can grasp the moment and mould it into an appropriatable form and string it onto the narrative of your account of the day. Oh, it was lovely this evening. The sunset was lovely. I walked down the streets. I haven't been here before. Blah, 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 blah. Lots was going on. Only a very little is relevant. Why is it relevant? Because it looks quite nice and it's got a hole in it. And if it's got a hole in it, I put the thread in it. That is to say, I can say something about it. There's lots of things you see when you walk down the street. You can't catch them. They're gone. We ignore all of that. Because if we attended to that, we become speechless. And if we couldn't give an account of ourselves to other people and nod our heads in agreement when they give an account of themselves, where would we be? All alone. We don't want to be all alone, so we have to speak and hear. And then we have human community. Where is that operating? What is the stage on which our life is unfolding? In the tradition, this is described as the Dharmadhatu. Dharmadhatu, you could say, is the space of all dharmas, or the space of all experience. It's an infinite hospitality and an infinite source. It's both the source, because there is no other base or ground out of which anything appears, but it's also the hospitality in that it's spacious enough that everybody gets exactly the right room. All experiences are just as they are. So the emptiness of the space of phenomena allows the endless showing or unfolding of the richness of phenomena. So in the traditional example, it's often used, we have a mirror and we have reflections. The reflections are in the mirror. You can't take a reflection out of a mirror. It's impossible. The reflection is in the mirror. The reflection is the mirror, yet it's not the mirror. Without a mirror, you wouldn't have reflections. When you look in the mirror, you see reflections. You don't see the mirror. The mirror is the infinite, invisible host which generously shows itself in the form of its inhabitation. Just as if we were to meet someone and to introduce ourselves to them in terms of the listing of all the bacteria which are running around in our gut. So that's what the mirror does. It says, this is what inhabits me, this is me. We don't want people to know what's in our intestines. We cover it up. We go for the reflection, the outer presentation, the image as being the thing itself. But without the mirror, you wouldn't have the reflection. Without the emptiness of the mind, how would we have ceaseless experience? Because experience, to show itself, needs an experiencer. But when we look in meditation to find the experiencer, we don't find anything. This is the great mystery of our existence, that emptiness shows itself through its own clarity without any need to divide into a subject on one side and an object on the other. But even when that division of subject and object occurs, it occurs within the mirror, and so is an illusion. So from the point of view of Dzogchen, there is no need to try to correct the problems of ignorance, because ignorance is an illusion within the mirror of the mind. In the higher tantras, ignorance is still seen as an obstacle to overcome, in which one needs to attend to the nature, the structure of the impediments that can get in the way, and allow oneself to incorporate them again and again. So on these paths of transformation or transmutation, one is ceaselessly encountering the habitual appropriative move and then dissolving it into the awareness that actually this is the form of the deity. And the more you do the practice, the arising of the limiting form and its liberation into its primordially pure form, the wisdom aspect of the deity as the expression of the pure nature of the mind, continues. But in Dzogchen, there is the clarity that from the very beginning there has never been a true division. There isn't a subject on the one side, an object on the other. There isn't an inside on the one side and an object or external arena on the other. These are how experience shows itself. Experience arises all at once. So, for example, there's quite a nice mirror on the wall there. The mirror shows the rich diversity of contents in the room. According to how you're placed in the room shows itself as a particular aspect. What we see in the mirror at the moment doesn't exhaust the potential of the mirror to keep showing itself. When we look in the reflection in the mirror, we see diversity. We can have discernment as to the particular details of what is arising. And with that discernment, we can apply all kinds of interpretive terms to create the sense that, oh, there are 3 men sitting in a row and then 2 women sitting there and da-da-da. And some people are wearing green and some people are wearing dark blue and so on. We can build up all sorts of interpretive pictures which are seemingly both layered on top of the reflection but also being massaged into it. And the more you approach the reflection with your interpretation, you can directly experience self-delusion. You can talk yourself into there being somebody in the mirror. Most people do it in the morning. They're cleaning their teeth and think, God, I look like shit today. Oh my goodness. So, I'm in the mirror. No, you're not. You're out there cleaning your teeth. If you took the toothbrush and rubbed it up and down on the mirror, it wouldn't really help. It would just be another household chore to clean it. It wouldn't get you anywhere. So, the thought is in the mind. The thought doesn't give you purchase to the actuality in terms of appropriation, but it does in terms of appreciation. So the aesthetic experience of the richness of what can be seen in the variegated display of different colours and shapes in the mirror is the richness of the mind. That would be the traditional symbol of the richness of the mind. Everything is there as it is, and yet it's equal in being empty. It has no real differentiation. It's devoid of substance. It has the capacity to allow the mind to move through all these images and construct many different pictures and forms. And it's fundamentally without any inherent self-nature. So that's a brief description of the 5 traditional wisdoms, which are the purification of the 5 root kleshas or afflictions. And these are all directly embedded in the nature of the mind. When we say everything is empty, it doesn't mean that it goes into a homogenizing machine, and that if everything has one taste, it's somehow flattened out. One taste and differentiated taste are inseparable. They're not 2 different things. So while we see diversity of color, shape, taste on the point of contact of the senses, we feel internal responses of enthusiasm and eagerness or shyness and moving away. This rich pulsatory movement is nothing at all. All of this is happening, and yet nothing is happening. This is the great mystery of emptiness. So, back in the early enunciation of this view in the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara, with the encouragement of Shakyamuni Buddha, is pointing out to Sariputra, everything which you encounter has no substance to it. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. When we say form is emptiness, whatever you've been holding on to, you won't find anything there. And yet this emptiness is also form. There is no contradiction. There aren't 2 categories of emptiness and fullness. The mirror is such an important symbol in all of these teachings, exactly because the emptiness of the mirror and the fullness of the mirror are not in contradiction and are inseparable, and yet are not precisely the same. It is, from one point of view, it is as if they are the same, and from another point of view, it is as if they are very different. You can't say there is only one thing, and you can't say there are many different things. So, in the dangerous ways in which our mind can develop, we have these prapanchas, or dualistic categories. There are 8 basic ones, and the first is usually described as only one thing or many different things. So we have, our mind works by setting up oppositional categories, each of which defines itself in terms of exclusion. If something's hot, it's not cold. If someone's tall, they're not short. But of course, they're only tall in relation to some people. There will be someone else who's 7 foot tall, and suddenly the tall person starts to look small. Something that's hot to the touch is not hot at all in terms of molten steel. So all of these categorizations are relative, and yet our mind structures our experience as if the law of exclusion, that if this is this, it's not that, is establishing an internal essence. But clearly, and hopefully you can see, it is the dynamic of exclusion which creates the seeming singularity of this. This is this because it's not that. So the thisness of this is inseparable from that. This and that are born together, and it's there, the dynamic of seeming exclusion, which allows us to take this as this. In that way, this is linked to that, and that is linked to there, and all the phenomena in the world are mutually arising. And this is the richness of the reflection in the mirror. So here we are in this room together. We can look around, see different people, maybe some people we know a bit, some other people we don't know. Bits of history that we've had with different people arise, different possibilities of stories. What is all this? This is the creativity of the mind. What is established by it? The possibility of movement. You see someone you haven't seen for a while and you go towards them to say hello. You meet someone who you don't remember having seen before and you're a little more hesitant because it seems there's no real bridge that allows you immediate access to that person. But if you smile at them and they respond, then some little tentative bridge starts to be built up, and then trucks of semantic movement can occur across that bridge and you build up some narrative picture together. This is called dynamic. This is called changing. Nothing is established except the patterns of movement. These patterns of movement are, for those of you familiar with Dzogchen presentation, a great deal of what's done in the arena of Hundrup and Tögal, in which we experience everything as the ceaseless unfurling of the display of the light of the mind. The light of the mind is the lived vibrancy of direct experience. What blocks that is not the hard, self-existing nature of things out there in the world. What blocks our appreciation of that is the gravitational pull of the solidifying orientation of our own conceptualization. Why would we want to do that? The sign says freedom is openness, but we go towards closure. We go towards appropriation. We want to get something, but if we look back in our lives, we have had many, many somethings. These somethings have largely gone. Even if you've made a lot of money, it's in the bank. What are you going to do with it? How much booze can you drink in a day? Now you've got too much to make use of. If you haven't made much money and you feel very poor, food is fairly cheap in this country now. You can survive. Hopes and fears. What will I do? How will I make my life the way I want it to be? That will depend on factors extraneous to yourself. The rate of exchange of the pound to the euro. It's fluctuated quite a lot since the beginning of the year. If you are, like me, a pensioner, then the wealth of pension funds depends largely on the stock market. And the stock market's been going up and down like a yo-yo. So our lives are influenced by what happens in Syria, in the Ukraine, in South America, in India and China. These affect the world economic field, and that affects how we are. Not just in terms of what we can buy in the shops, but in terms of our hopes and fears, our sense of stability. You know, are there going to be terrorists coming to London? When I walk into a big train station, do I need to be checking things out? Has somebody left a bag? Is that person dangerous to me? There are many invitations to have lots of thoughts and to take the production of these thoughts as meaningful. I think one could say that all mental health conditions are aspects of thought production. Very extreme hebephrenic schizophrenia, where there's almost seemingly no conceptualization going on, is a very extreme example, but by and large, people are caught up in ideas. The idea takes them over, whether it's in an obsessive compulsive way or a depressed way. The mind welds itself into its own production and takes that production as being veridical, as being a true account of what is there. That is to say, the relationship that we have then with the world as it is no longer direct, but it is being refracted. It's not being refracted through a beautiful crystal, which increases the coloration and the potential of experience. It's being refracted through a dark crystal, which gives the same kind of opaque, non-illuminating illumination again and again. If you feel depressed and hopeless and worried, the flavour of that can be spread across any kind of situation. hope is upsetting, hopelessness can be very reassuring. My life is shit. It's always been shit. It will never get better. At least I know who I am. What about you? You look chirpy and cheerful. You'll be sorry. In that way, stasis can wrap itself around us as if it is giving us a definitive knowledge. So the accumulation of knowledge is, as it were, the internal paralleling of the external accumulation of things. And as these are built up, it can appear that we are creating an edifice that will protect us against the vagaries of existence. But when we observe, attrition is always there. There is an undermining. People lose their faith. People lose their jobs. People lose their health. Whatever we have ebbs away. What will I rely on? What will I take refuge in? You can take refuge in the Buddha. That's fantastic. Fantastic. Take refuge in the Buddha. We don't know where he lives. Nobody's seen him for quite a while. Take refuge in the Buddha. Take refuge in the Dharma. I've got a library there. You can buy more Dharma books. Take them home. Put them on the shelf. Bow to them every day. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Dharma. Subject, verb, object. I am made secure by what I have. If I possess these Dharma objects, if I have a shrine, I can clean it every day and fill the bowls every day, and then I will have what Freudians would like to call object constancy. And object constancy is very important for small children, that they know when they're going to be fed and where their dolls are and where they're going to sleep for the night, and it helps them settle. So now I know what to do. And now I've memorized the puja. And when the puja starts, a ling comes out my mouth, I know who I am, I know where I am. I'm with my gang. The Sangha and I together, moving forward into the happy veil of enlightenment. Could be true or could be another delusion. What's the difference? The difference is when the sound comes out of your mouth, where does it come from? If it comes from your ego, it's probably not going to take you very far. That bus will get a hole in the tire before you die. Moment by moment, the ground emptiness, which is prior to and yet welcoming of and yet never divided by the division of subject and object, of self and other. So all the dualistic activity of daily life can continue without any change. This is why they always say in the teaching, you don't have to change what you do or what you wear or what you eat or even how you talk. You don't have to try to be a better person. You simply have to observe in the moment of the arising of your place in the integrated field, the natural clarity of the mind. You have to observe this is what is arising. The arisingness is also the dissolvingness. And so it's fresh upon fresh upon fresh upon fresh, beyond appropriation. But as soon as we find the handle, we're handling ourselves. Handle maker, handle grabber, handle maker, handle grabber. And then we're lost. Where are we lost? We're lost in the Dharma Dhatu. In the realm of light, we cover our eyes. Why would we do that? Because it's possible. Because it's possible. That's the thing. All sorts of things in life are possible. Many of us will look back on our lives and think, why did I do that? The only answer is, it seemed a good idea at the time. Hindsight illuminates nothing. In the moment, in the particular configuration we were caught in, I seemed to be defined by certain feelings, impulses, intentions, and found myself moving towards someone, high or low, good or bad, exciting or not, and that brought about some period of interaction for a while. What was the fruit of that? The passing of time. What is to be taken from that? A few memories and a bit of karma. Karma is the echo chamber of the world. Karma is the subtle vibratory tendency which is set up. Although I haven't smoked tobacco for a very long time, if I smell a cigar, it smells good. That is a subtle vibration. Who used to smoke them? I did. But I'm not the I who used to smoke them. Or maybe I am. And in that way you can see something which is done and dusted, finished, hovers, ghost-like, as a potential. But then myriad potentials exist. So instead of trying to purify my habit formations, my obstacles, my defilements, all these limited factors which make me who I am, what we can do is open the big store cupboard of the Dharma Dhatu, and shelf after shelf after shelf of herbs and spices you have never yet smelled. Wonderful. And there's a few little pots of your own armpit, your own habitual formations, how you've screwed up your life, all the things you don't like about yourself. There are a few little pots of that, but they're very small. There's a lot more flavours in the world. And that is what the practice of Dzogchen is. By opening to space, the narcissistic fantasy that the ego is the centre is dissolved within the infinite expanse that our own awareness is the centre. Narcissistic condensation, or the self-reflexive and self-reflective turn of our ego constructive conceptualization, is creating a density, a gravitational pool, which, because it attracts that which is familiar, covers us in a cladding of the familiar, which then dulls us to the possibility of the freshness of new possibilities. This doesn't have to be removed. The question is, who am I in the moment when I am my unpleasant ego formation, when I am in my anger, or my jealousy, or my selfishness, or my pride? Where is this? Who is the experiencer? The experiencer is the mind itself. What is being experienced? Thought, catching thought, catching thought. One thought says, I am the subject. The other thought is labelled the object. And these two tumble on and on and on and on, going around like a perpetual motion machine. Who is the experiencer of this? The mind itself. Never changes, never moves. The construction of the ego self is always changing and always moving. It is the fresh, open energy of the mind itself, unborn, ungraspable, arising in the manner of something limited. How is this possible? Because of the imagination. As in a theatre, actors who have a life of their own pretend to be someone for money. And if they're successful, they get more and more invitations to pretend to be something, someone for money. We, without any special training, without even being specially rewarded for it, are quite good at being someone. We may feel that we are in continuous self-presentation, but people who know us are thinking, you have a shadow, certain contradictions in what you say and what you do, not quite fully in role. It's theatre. This is the imaginal. This is the basis for Mahayoga and Anuyoga. The mandala is the stage of the theatre. And within that, we imagine ourselves to be something. This is the meaning of Keirim. Keirim, or the stage or activity of development, this is the dressing room. In the old days, if you're a good actor, you would have a dresser, somebody who would come in, help you a bit with your makeup, adjust your wig, make sure that your clothes were on, check it from the back. So the guru is the dresser. The guru says, we are staging Guru Rinpoche. So in Guru Rinpoche, you have to have a vajra and a bell. No, put it in the right hand. Okay, now I've got the right thing. And you get dressed up, and the more you practice, hey, this is who I am. But now another Lama comes to town offering Tara. Okay, we could do Tara, why not? We've got Uncle Vanya, we've got so many plays in the world, in London, so many theatres. We could be lots of people. So in the Tibetan tradition, because they love theatre, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of things you can be. It's like a magic room. A big chest full of funny clothes, hats, katvangas, skull cups, anything you want. You can change the colour of your face. You can have long hair, short hair. You can grow boobs if you're a guy. It's fantastic. You can be whoever you want to be for a while under certain conditions. Better not to walk down the street dressed like that. What is the function of that kind of practice? It is to show everything is the imagination. This is the meaning of the Tibetan term hlundrup. Hlundrup means like a hill or a mountain, and drup means accomplished. It means instantly accomplished. The instant presence or the immediate presence. Sometimes they're like a fish turning in water, and this is the imagination. You imagine yourself to be that, and off you go. You watch a bunch of small kids playing together, and they'll say, oh, let's do this. Okay. And immediately they flip into whatever the next game is. Take that on. They walk in that way, talk in that way for a while, and then they come out of it. It is the mind which is chief. And it's because the mind has no definitive, restrictive, essential self-substance that it is free to engage with the infinite potential of the imagination. Now, this imagination is not self-indulgent. It's not just displaying itself for its own deliciousness, the felt presence of the arising of possibilities, but it is communicative. That by being free to be many different people, we can relate to other people in different ways. That in our lives we meet grandparents, small children, formal people, tax inspectors, and so on. And in each of these situations, we behave differently, if we're going to have any success at all. People who get problems in life imagine that they can be themselves. Authenticity is bad news. To thine own self be true. This above all things, to thine own self be true. This is called irony. Dad didn't really mean it. Dad was really saying, check out the deal. The phenomenological field comes first. And we know this because if you're doing a meditation, large-scale caring meditation, out of the clear blue sky, there arises rainbow light, which moves and forms into a seed syllable, out of which arises the mandala palace, within which there appears a throne, and on the throne comes a deity. The deity doesn't arrive first, wandering like a refugee, thinking, where am I going to sleep tonight? The house is there, the deity arrives. That's our life. The context is there before the person. So it makes sense in life, open your eyes, open your ears, and work out what's going on. It's what Namkhai Norbu calls working with circumstances. The circumstances are there, check it out, what's possible, respond into that. If you try and work it out in your head, you then clunk your way with your agenda and your preformed expectations into a situation, and you sort of bang into it. So the interesting thing there is the very emptiness of the mind is the basis for compassion. How are we going to meet other people if we are true to ourselves? Because when we meet other people, we have to meet them halfway. We have to have a sense of how they are. If they look sad, we shouldn't be trying to cheer them up by telling them a joke. We relate to their sadness. And then through that, being met in their sadness, they can come out of it. If someone else is happy and joking and you say, oh, but what about the bombing in Syria? What would be the point of that? We're not here to wag some superego finger at other people. Relating means coming into formation in the moment of the formation of the experiential field. That is to say, you are a participant in the non-dual unfolding of the world. So in that way, the empty integrity of the Dharmakaya, which is inseparable from ground spaciousness, reveals itself as the clarity of everything coming at once, which is Hundrup. And within that, moment by moment, we find ourselves behaving in different ways. It doesn't have to be pre-choreographed, nor are we completely leaves in the autumn wind blown hither and thither by circumstances, but there is a subtle interfacing in which you are neither the slave nor the master. One of the biggest problems is that we seek to manage and deal with our anxiety, our uncertainty, the ontological insecurity, the not knowing who we are, to manage that by trying to secure circumstances, to control events, that if the world is the way I want it to be, then I will feel okay. A lot of energy is spent that way. But the world doesn't fit in with our ideas. We can see what happened in Tibet. Great meditators, huge traditions, largely blown away. All compounded things are impermanent. Monasteries are impermanent. Teachers are impermanent. Books can be burned and thrown on the fire. Everything can crumble into dust. That was not the point. The statue isn't the answer. The book isn't the answer. The mind is the answer. Right from the Dhammapada, the Buddha is saying, the mind is chief. The mind is chief. The mind comes first. Just as the wheel of a cart is going round and round, and the wheel leads the trace that's left in the sand. The mind is first. So what is our mind? Our mind is emptiness. What do we experience? The display of emptiness. So we have these three factors which are the structure of our existence. What can be called our actual nature, our true nature. There are many different ways of translating these Tibetan terms, and unfortunately the field that we are interested in is as yet wide open. So it's a creative period in terms of translation, but it can often be very bewildering because we want to get a handle on it. But what is it? It will take some time for the terms to be more precise and more useful. At the moment we have to stumble a bit with them. So we have the Ngowo, which means our face, the face we had before we were born. The ground nature, what is here, but is never caught. Ngowo means like the mirror. You never catch the mirror, but we are the mirror. So the awareness of the mind, lucid, without content, and yet full of content. So the fullness of content arises as its creative presentation, or its display, or its showing. This is called Rangjin, and Rangjin is compared to the complexion. So our face, just our face, shows our life. Our energy, our health, or our sickness shines through as our complexion. We can read someone's complexion. If If someone's just got a dull face, you're not quite sure what's going on, then something shows. So this is the energy of the mind just in its first form, like as the sun is still below the horizon, but the first rays of light are coming in, and suddenly, everything falls into place. In the dark night, your mind's imagining this and that, and it's like, it's not so far to get home now. You see, but it's as if the seeing is there before the activation, before the participation. And that's the third aspect, which is the movement of energy within the field. In Tibetan tukje, which can mean compassion, but here it means the participation of the movement within the field of reflection, which is within the field of openness, and this participation is each of us, as we are in this moment. We are called into participation by the face of the other. People invite us forward or say, stay away. How can we manage that? By not having an agenda. So if we say, I'm going to save all sentient beings, I need to be busy. You didn't know this, but I'm actually founder of the International Evangelical Mormon Buddhist Society. And I welcome you here for our training on door knocking. We're going to go out tonight and we're going to save people for the Buddha. Do you think there are many happy people here sitting, watching television, bored, listless? Suddenly you knock on the door, I bring you good news. I don't think people want that. And that would not be a Buddhist way of doing it, because you would be trying to stuff them with your idea, but they're already full of stuff. So, participation, the salvation of all beings, is to rest in the open spaciousness which includes all beings, which welcomes all beings as they are, and can find a way with flexibility, with sensitivity, with empathic attunement, to just ease the motility a bit, to get it moving a wee bit more. Because the main thing which blocks us from awakening is the sleep of solidity, of reassurance, of density, of gravitational pull, of hanging on to how things are, in the face of the actual dynamic nature of the unfolding of experience. So from that point of view, emptiness is both the emptiness of all the forms of experience, but in particular, the emptiness of all the contents of our mind. So we know this from meditation. At first, you sit and you get carried away by thoughts very easily. Gradually, you become aware, these thoughts go by. They come and they go. I don't need to respond. I have a choice. And so the habitual formation, the karmic tendency, the egosyntonic need to wrap oneself in that particular formation starts to relax. And now we really have choice. Why would I get involved in that? And that's a wonderful question. So in the tradition they say the Dharmakaya is for yourself, the form kayas, the Sambhogakaya and the Nimanakaya, are for other people. That is to say, if you recognize the ground openness of your mind, just being with it's enough. No need to be very busy. There's nothing to be done. But a movement in the field acts as an evocation, and you find yourself called forth into an engagement, a meeting, some sort of transaction with another person. So the center of the arising of yourself is exactly not in yourself. You are for the other. And that's when life becomes easier, because you then only do what has to be done. If you have no deep impulse in yourself, if we see that people cannot be saved, because the one that you would try to save, if you take it seriously, you are actually an agent against it being saved. Because the ego is never saved. It's not damned either, but it's never saved. Awakening is already present as awareness. The one who is not awake will never awaken, because the ego doesn't awaken. The huge fantasy is that you can turn shit into chocolate. Shit is shit, chocolate's chocolate. In the traditional example, if you take a piece of coal and you keep washing it, it will not become chalk. Coal is coal is coal. If you don't have the Buddha nature, you can't be a Buddha. Because you have the Buddha nature, what are you doing that's getting in the way of the Buddha nature? If you just stop doing that, everything you need is there. It's not about doing more. It's not about improving, about acquiring. It's about non-distraction. So when we get into rescuing other people and taking their story seriously, we're making more density, more obscuration, when there is no obscuration. It's not so important. It's a very beautiful experience, which I'm sure many of you have had, of watching someone like Namkhai Nobu Rinpoche in action. After he's been teaching, he sits in a chair and people come up. And he is like a martial arts expert. People are coming up. They're getting a smile, 3 words. They're going, oh, I just met Father Christmas. He's sitting there. And he can do it for 10 people or 100 people. How does he do that? By not taking it too seriously. He's there, he's available, he's responsive, but he's not solid. Whereas we get worried, are you all right? You look a bit, are you okay? Are you sure? That's the very big difference. Resting in the space, in the present of the unfolding of the luminosity of the mind itself, which includes all beings, it's the subtle movements which are enough just to rectify, like a good osteopath. They're not tugging and pulling. They're just making a small adjustment that allows a settling into what is already there and functional. So it's minimal intervention, but subtle and to the point, which means tracking what's there. If you went to see an osteopath, you would be concerned if they didn't take any history. If they said, right, let's begin. Whoa, you don't know me. I want to tell you something about my back. I'll find out. No, you're not fucking about on my back. Huh? Me. I pay you money. You take care of me. That's very important, isn't it? That we have to show the doctor what's wrong. If the doctor's not listening, we should be a bit worried. So, the movement of the participation into the glistening field of the clarity arising within the Dharmakaya is responsive to what is received. It is passive receptive before it's active. And this is the big difference that you will find if you go into the heart of Dzogchen practice. It's not about techniques and methods. Because the problem with techniques and methods is that they presuppose that this form is what you need. As if you were being trained to be an engineer or an electrician, and you arrive on the job lugging this huge box with screwdrivers and spanners and bits of wire and a bit of copper in case you need this, that and the other. Plumbers have these huge bags with endless bits of stuff. I've got an extra washer in here somewhere. Because they need that. Because they are people who are mucking about and trying to find a way. It's not necessary. Receiving and responding, but not interpreting, not inserting one's ego or any of one's habitual agenda factors into the situation. this is the way in which we proceed. So, this is just a very initial suggestion of the way in which emptiness, which can also be called openness, permits us to function in regard to other people in their emptiness without rupturing the interplay of subject and object as the self-display of the mind itself. Because as soon as you get into rescuing or helping or doing something for someone else, you're going to be operating from a limited perspective. So when we relax and we receive, the field of movement is there, and we find our place. And as it says in the text, if you go up to heaven, go to heaven. If you go down to hell, go to hell. Some people have easy, happy lives. Some people have a lot of sickness. Some people have loneliness, depression, sorrow. However it is, that's what it is. If you take it seriously, if you enter into judgment about it and say, I shouldn't have this kind of a life, things should be different for me, I don't deserve this, that position taking vis-a-vis yourself is part of the endless fragmentation. Because now there's not just me, there's me with thoughts about myself. But of course it's not quite true what I just said, because sometimes I also feel endlessly elaboration. And this fragmentation hasn't fragmented anything. Except when you believe it to be true, you feel fragmented. So, the emptiness of the mind is the hospitality for the rich diversity of how we are in the night, in the day, in happiness, in sorrow. Being with what is really the only place that we can be. When we go into memories of the past, anxious expectations about the future, we find that we have entered into a place which is nowhere. And it is that nowhereness which is very, very dangerous for us. Because there is no end to trying to transform nowhere into somewhere, no thing into something. And the paradox is, we settle into the nothing, the empty, the open, we find everything. So the natural state of the mind, or the ground nature of the mind, is nothing at all. The mind cannot be grasped. And yet everything arises in the mind. So nothing and everything are born together, inseparable. And within that everything, what is required in this moment is evoked by the circumstances. So the terrible burden of ego agency, of trying to work out whether we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, whether we're making other people happy or sad, endlessly adjusting ourselves, that can be relaxed. And the more relaxed we are, the more we can encourage other people to relax. They get on with their life, we get on with our life. And if they experience relaxation, profound relaxation, then the fruit of all the Dharma practices is there. Everything goes into the central channel. The central channel, the avaduti, is emptiness. So when we take the male and female energies, or the solar and lunar energies, it means essentially the polarities which exist as a basic pulsatory charge in ourselves, hopes, fears, right, wrong, me, you, all of the dualities, when these are brought into the central channel on an energetic level, this is one of the many methods of experiencing the mind as openness. But the mind has always been open. So in the most direct form of the practice, we simply sit open to the mind as it is, without editing or controlling, pushing away, gathering in, and stay present on the point of experience. Whenever we stray from the point of experience, we go into thought elaboration, and that thought elaboration commentarial, discursive consciousness is what leads us astray. So now we come to the empty ending of the evening. Time to go home. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and hope you have good luck in your practice.